Hey, how you doing? This is John, and welcome to John's Long Box. Today we're talking with Aaron Lopresti. How are you doing, Aaron?
I am great, John. Thanks for having me on. Looking
Oh,
forward to talking comics and whatever else comes up.
yeah. I thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know, I just am just so flattered and humbled that big names want to come and talk to me. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Well, anybody that's got long box in their name, I'm a fan of.
Oh, okay.
All I got is short boxes now, but I used to have a ton of long boxes, but they don't fit in the closet as well. So I've gone short boxes.
Oh, okay. Can I? I'm going to show you something then. If
Okay.
you think you're a fan now, how's this? That's my
Okay.
comment.
Well, I don't know. My wife must have seen, Shelly must have seen. Have you posted a picture like that
Oh,
before?
anytime anybody talks about comic books, I'm showing that picture.
Yeah, because she's like, that guy's got a lot of comics. And I go, yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I've got like a closet full of short boxes. It's not that impressive. I traded, I went through two stages where I traded almost in my entire collection in 1982-ish, 83 to get a Spider-Man #2. And
Ooh.
then recently, within the last 5 or 6 years, I got rid of all my post 1980 books. So all I have now is pre 1980.
Oh, yeah. I'm tempted every once in a while to get rid of my collection, and then I can't. My wife and I were looking for a house a couple of years ago, and I called the guy, and he showed up at my storage unit with a shoebox with $40,000 worth of cash. And then what a surprise! Said my collection was worth $40,000. What are the odds? When you're looking at a shoebox full of 40 grand, you're like, but I'm like, I know it's worth more. And I turned him down. And then the mortgage company said, if you had just dropped $40,000 into your bank account while you were being investigated for a mortgage, you would have lost. So can you imagine if I sold my comics and didn't get the mortgage? So I did that.
That would have sucked, right? So you didn't have your house and you don't have your comics anymore.
Right,
so
right. So
no,
we waited a couple of years ago. Now
I almost sold my collection a few years ago, but the people I talked to, no one wanted to, because I have a lot of Bronze Age stuff, and at the time, Bronze Age hadn't really taken off, and so they didn't want to give me what I wanted for it, and so I was just like, "Nah, I'll just hang on to it." And of course, I've been adding to it ever since because you never stop collecting, right?
I had a list and I filled up all the holes, and then I'm like, you know what? Now I want to get weird war tales. And
yeah, I do the same thing. It's like you finish a run and you're like, oh, I got to move on to something else. What do I want to move on to?
Now I'm collecting all the Atlas comics that I refused to get as a kid because it wasn't Marvel.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same thing. The Brute and what was the Iron Jaw had a couple of the Neil Adams covers.
Surprisingly good. All of those Atlas, the first issues 1 and 2s were good, and then by the third issue they realized they weren't getting paid, so they just scrambled to put out something.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the comic. So I always try to make each video somebody's first video, somebody's introduction. So who are you, and why are we talking comics?
Well, I am Aaron Lopresti. I've been mostly an artist, but a little bit of a writer throughout the last probably 30 years. I'm doing my own independent projects now, but I started working as an artist for Marvel back in 1990, doing a humor book called What The, which was their parody book. And I eventually graduated to doing some superhero stuff for them. And then Malibu Comics started their Ultraverse line and wooed me away with a much larger page rate. So I went over there and do a book called Sludge, which is where I kind of feel like I first sort of felt my work was kind of at a professional level, and then just been scratching and crawling ever since. Worked for, drew Wonder Woman for 2 years, Justice League International for a couple of years, Ms. Marvel for a couple of years. I drew Planet Hulk, or at least half of Planet Hulk, and just a variety. I've worked for every major company and on just about every character you can think of at one time or another.
Yeah.
I also went to film school at USC back in the mid to late 80s. So I have kind of a a little bit of a film background, as well as everything I've done in comics for the last 30 years.
So you've been a comic book fan since you were a kid. You were talking about you sold some of your collection. Oh man, I've been saying this for a while now. Nobody makes good comics unless you grew up devouring comics, with obviously
Right.
the exception of the Jack Kirby's who didn't have comics as a kid. But
Mm-hmm.
oh man, you eat
I
green.
was, yeah, I started, I think at first, I used to think for a long time that the first comic I ever bought that I had a memory of buying was, I mean, on my own, like I rode my bike to the 7-Eleven and bought, off the rack, was a Spider-Man 138, which is the Mindworm issue.
Oh, I love that
And
cover.
but what I discovered later was actually not too much later. I had also had a copy of Frankenstein #7, which came out in 1973, which predated that Amazing Spider-Man by several months. And so, as far as I can tell, the Frankenstein #7 was the first comic book I actually ever bought on my own. The first one I ever owned was my mom bought me on a vacation in 1971. We'd travel around the car back then, right? Nobody was
Yeah,
flying. It was all drive wherever you went.
yeah, do that
And
with six brothers and sisters.
yeah, exactly. And I got FF 112, which is the black cover with the Hulk versus Thing, Buscema. And then Amazing Adventures #8, which had the Neil Adams Thor versus Black Bolt cover. And those were the very first comics that I ever had. And but I really started getting into it, reading it full time in about late 1973 and early 1974, which would have put me about 9 to 10 years old. And then I just got hooked on them because I've always drawn since I was a little kid. I mean, like pre-kindergarten, I was an artist or wanted to be an artist. And when I discovered comics, seemed like the perfect marriage of writing and drawing, of storytelling. And I just became a huge fan and have been ever since.
Yeah, so good. I mean, I resisted reading because reading, who wants to read? That's like doing math at home. You know what I mean? That's a school activity. You know what I mean? Like sit home and do math problems, until I discovered comic books and I realized, hey, reading could be something that's fun. So I fully credit comic books with teaching me how to read because I wanted to read,
Right.
I wanted to see what Black Bolt was doing, what Reed Richards was saying, what Ben Grimm was fighting with Johnny Storm about,
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah. I see on your hat you got the Wraith of God, and I'm fanboying out, so I get a little nervous sometimes.
That's all right.
I'll chill out in a minute or two. But I got Wraith of God, and I had to say it was the best crowdfunded comic ever. Like it just hit all the buttons. Lately, I've been getting into horror, and westerns, and all the crowdfunded comics that I've been buying. The art is spectacular, but yours was one of the first comics that I was like, wow, this writing is good. So you said you wrote a little bit, but you were up in your notch as a writer, if you ask me, because the characters.
Well, thank you very much. What I tell people is that I grew up. Even as a little kid, I didn't just draw. I wrote my stories and I drew them. So I always had as much interest in writing a story as I did illustrating it. And going to film school really helped me learn the craft of what I call entertainment writing, which is, television, movies, comics, that type of thing. I could never write a novel, I don't believe. I just don't. But I can write, I could write a screenplay. I could write a teleplay. I can write a comic book script. And I think I have an understanding of the elements that you want in a story that is engaging, that makes you want to keep turning the pages. And then it's just a matter of, putting that stuff together and feeling those beats and understanding that, okay, we need to cut to this scene here. And now we need a scene, you read the whole thing and go, this is really missing this element. Because I have the ability kind of to look at my own stuff as a fan would read it. And if it's missing something, it's very glaring, obviously, to me. I'm not really caught up in this sort of idea that, well, I wrote it, so therefore it's sacred. I I kind of have the ability to sort of step back from my own work and be an editor and
Okay.
a fan and say, there's something that's not right here and I need to fix it, or I'm missing this, or this is too much, or this scene is too long. I'm getting bored. I need to cut that, those type of things. And I think going to film school really was helpful in that regard.
Do you have somebody that edits your writing, or because
No,
you do it all
just
yourself?
me. I've got a friend, very talented, very creative guy that when I get stuck on a story point, I did this on Wraith of God and I did it on Blood Hunters, the one that's about to come out. And I'd go over there to his house and we'd sit and talk and I go, okay, here's the story. And I'd give him the story and I'd say, no, I'm right here and I've got to get him over here, but I can't figure out how to get him from here to there believably. What do you think? And then we'd start tossing ideas back and forth. And then by the end of the evening, we would have the whole thing figured out. Then I'd, go back home and write it down and, move on to the next point. So that's kind of how I work. I got an idea. I'll do an outline. I'll start writing. And usually when you hit those bumps in the roads or a pothole, however you want to describe it, it's pretty obvious. You go, I got a problem here. I need to fix this. And that's just kind of how I work until the whole thing's done. Usually I will if it's like Wraith of God had sort of a twist ending. It was a bit of a mystery. And, so I had the ending figured out before I even started.
Okay.
And I try to do that. I like to know where I'm going. And then it's easier to backtrack to make all the steps lead to where you're going rather than start here and not really have an idea of where you're going and then meander your way to a finale. That usually doesn't work.
So do you write everything in a full script and then use your script to write the comic? Okay. I was wondering if you draw everything, I wonder if you could just draw it out. But,
Well, sometimes I'll do that. But what I'll do is I'll sit down and I'll write the whole thing and put in the dialogue and everything. And then when I start drawing it, you'll find the mistakes and you'll go, wait a minute. Because when you're writing a script, you think like a writer. And then when you start drawing it, you think like the artist, or in a film sense, the director, right? And you start realizing, oh, the writer part of me thinks this scene was great, but the artist part of me says this scene is too long or it's not long enough. And then I improvise as I go along, and then I'll change the script to whatever I've drawn if I make changes in the art. But that's kind of how I work. I'm changing dialogue up to the very last second.
Dialogue is tough. Here I am commiserating with the famous comic book guy, and I'm nobody. Yeah, I know how it is, Aaron. Yeah,
you're not nobody.
But yeah, I'm writing scripts, and and I read them out loud to myself. And I'm like, oh my god, this is awful. Nobody talks like this. So, yeah, dialogue is tough. It's cool writing a guy punching through a tank or something like that, but talking to your wife in a comic book, that's not how people talk.
Well, the hardest thing for me is because you start writing dialogue and you start, oh, that sounds really great, and then you can sometimes get off on tangents where you're just really patting yourself on the back on how clever this dialogue is, and then you realize you've just written a page or two that has nothing to do with moving the story along, and then you have to cut all these great lines that really, they're great lines for the sake of being great lines. And so that's my biggest problem sometimes, is going off on those dialogue tangents. And then also you're always have to worried about, well, I can't be too verbose because I've only got so much room in a panel to squeeze in this dialogue. So you have to sort of edit down
text, and then the guy looking over the word below.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, I got to edit this in half and get the same point across, but not so wordy. And
well, you could always just have him sitting in a diner drinking Starbucks, talking back and forth. That seems to be what comic books are doing these days.
Yeah, well, it's not what my comic books are doing. That's why I'm rebelling against that crap, man. That's
thank God. Yeah, I read Wraith of God, and I don't know what's going on, but lately I've been getting into monster comics, and I wonder if, like, me as growing up, I'm a little tired of superheroes, but I read Wraith of God, and I was like, this is like just the amount of monsters, just the amount of cowboys, just the amount of suspense and mystery with excellent artwork. So did you grow up, you said Frankenstein was your first comic. Were you a monster fan?
Yeah. I always liked monster movies. And the funny thing is, though, there was always this sort of, there's always been this sort of artistic bent to my enjoyment of monsters. In other words, if I didn't like the design of a monster, then I had really no interest in I didn't watch movies just because it was a monster movie. If it
Okay.
had a monster that I thought looked good, then I was interested in it. If it didn't, then I not so much, And so I always enjoyed the art of makeup effects. In fact, it was something I was thinking about getting into earlier in my life, and thankfully I didn't, because right now I'd really be unemployed with nothing. Everything's CGI, right? There's no practical effects hardly anymore at all. But
there's something about practical effects that are just amazing.
Yeah,
they have real world physics. They have weight. Like if you watch the first Star Wars movies and you see the models of the X-wings, and then you watch the new Star Wars movies and CGI, it's like this ineffable feeling that just doesn't feel real.
Mm-hmm. And it's getting worse. It seems like you'd think they'd be getting better at CGI, but it seems to me it feels more lifeless. The more CGI stuff I see, the less interested I am in it.
I think it's a crutch that they're using more and more and more.
Right. Well, Mark Millar, I think, just posted something about the new Planet of the Apes movie, and I put a comment in there, and I just said I prefer dudes in makeup and costumes to all the monkeys being CGI. I'd much rather have Charlton Heston Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, that is a great movie.
Yeah,
that is a great. I just watched that a couple of years ago. It still holds up.
It's a tremendous film.
And Nova is still my first crush.
Yeah, well, if you land on a Planet of the Apes and you end up with her, you're not doing too bad.
I'm like, this Planet of the Apes ain't so bad. I'm the only talking human. I don't have to compete with anybody. I can ask her how her day is, and I'm done.
Yeah. I watched just recently, rewatched 1 Million Years BC with Raquel Welch, and it was like all these cave girls in there were just gorgeous. And I was like, being a caveman wouldn't have been too bad if this is what I got to choose from,
I'll hunt a mammoth for that.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go kill a dinosaur for you, babe.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's just a mammoth.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's like, "Oh yeah, well the cave next door, he hunted a Tyrannosaurus Rex." There you go.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and now so you went from Western Monsters, and now your new campaign is Kit Carter, and it's like space sci-fi.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I originally designed the character just as to be used as a sketchbook cover, because I wanted an image that would grab attention and people pick up the sketchbook. This is like 12 years ago. And but I've always been sort of a fan of the old EC comics and the bubble helmet space and the 50s sci-fi stuff. I always thought was
Hollywood stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And and I'd seen images before. Dave Stevens had done some of this in Alien Worlds, and William Stout, Bill Stout, he had an image that was always in the price guide. I can't remember whose comic shop it was for, but it was this really kind of Marilyn Monroe looking character in a space bubble helmet. And so I just always kind of liked that concept. And so I created this thing as sort of just a B movie type image. And then I just had tons of people coming up to me all the time going, "Oh, is this a character? When are you going to do a story?" And I was like, "Well, it's, not really." But people kept asking. I thought, you know what? I should develop a story. And so I just felt like after 2 Wraith of Gods, and that it'd be nice just to get a little bit of a break, do something really different, and then go back to Wraith of God after I finished this Kit Carter graphic novel. So that's sort of the plan. And I wanted to do, if you remember the graphic novels from the 80s that Marvel used to publish, right? Death of Captain Marvel.
Yep. Yeah.
Those,
I wanted the living monolith.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I wanted my format. So this Kit Carter is going to be 8.5 by 11.
Oh, okay.
And so and 64 pages, which was basically what the format was for the Marvel graphic novels. And just to kind of do something a little bit different. And I've already got Wraith of God 3 like half plotted out, so but this just is kind of a nice little diversion for me to kind of do something just a little bit different.
That image totally worked. I saw that image and I got excited. I was like, I gotta talk to Aaron. I want to find out what's going. It's great comp. It did everything. It did everything it was supposed to be. It was cool looking. It had a cool, sexy character, and it had that retro feel that made it was like comfortable and friendly, and I just can't wait. So I got to ask the name Kit Carter. Oh, how did you come up with that? I have a few theories, and I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Well, I'm going to hate to disappoint you. It's nothing all that clever. I was when I was coming up with a name for the character, and I had in my mind, I don't know why, but I had Kit Carson in my mind, and it sounded familiar, and it sounded like something that would work, right? But then I said, God, that sounds too familiar. So I started flipping through my old price guide, and I found, Kit Carson, of course, was a Western
Right.
character. And, but it just felt it felt like kind of a 50s B movie vibe that I was looking for. And so I thought, okay, well, I can't use Kit Carson, so why don't I just change it to Kit Carter? And so it was just that Kit Carson was, because of my, my background and experiences in comics and old movies, that was just in my mind, and it sounded right. But then I found out that I couldn't use it because it was already being used, and that's why it sounded so good. And I just altered it a little bit to come up with Kit Carter.
Because I was like, oh man, he's being clever, because I thought maybe you were tying it into John Carter, Warlord of Mars. And then,
I would love to say that was what I was doing, and it was all super clever. I'm a huge John Carter fan, and maybe that's why I went with Carter. I don't know, but I think it was just because it was close.
Yeah, it's a cool name. It is.
People ask me all the time, where do you get your ideas? How'd you come up with that? And I'm just like, there's no process. Stuff just like enters my brain, and then I have to sort of edit through it and filter it until it becomes actually something tangible. But you could see something, or maybe you read something and it'll spark an idea, or an idea comes to you because you saw something or read something a couple of years earlier. And then just at the right moment, it kind of comes into your head and you go, wait a minute, that'll work here, kind of thing. So I have no formula for creating this stuff.
Yeah.
It just,
again, I'm nobody, but I was in the shower yesterday, and the name just, I don't know where it popped into my name for a supervillain. And I
what I'm talking about.
Write myself off, and I wrote it down before I forgot it. And then I messaged one of my buddies. I'm like, what do you think of this name? He's like, that's a great name. I'm not saying it now because how it is.
Well, hey,
what a great name. I'm just singing in the shower. And next thing you know, where'd this come from? I wasn't even thinking about it.
Yep. It happens like that all the time. And usually someplace where you don't have access to write it down, right? It's like the middle of the night, so you got to get up and run and write this down before you forget it, because inevitably you do.
I'm commuting on the train. Now I'm glad I have a phone because I can write it down, but I don't have so many good ideas were lost on the subway because, back then, you, like a barbarian, you just sit there and daydream.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I did a story similar to what we're talking about. I did a story with Gen 13. It was they did a series, an extra Gen 13 series called Gen 13 Bootleg.
Yep.
And this was in the mid 90s or whatever. And I had this, I had originally was going to do it with Carl Kiesel, because we were in a studio together, and he was writing Superboy and other things at that time. Harley Quinn was the other thing so he was kind of a hot writer. He's working on the Superman titles, working on that. And I had this idea that I wanted to pitch this, because I knew they'd never let me write it. And so we had come up with this concept of sort of not Kit Carter, excuse me, Scooby-Doo sort of episode with Gen 13. And so I'd come up with the story and everything. And I said, he just really didn't have time to write it. And so I said, all right. So I pitched it on my own, and they were like, yeah, we love it. We'll go ahead and let you do it, but we really need to attach a writer of some gravitas to this, because we don't think that your name is big enough that you can, sell this book. And I said, all right. I said, what if and I knew Walter Simonson pretty well. I said, what if I can get Walter Simonson? And they said, okay, deal. So I called up Walter and I said, hey, would you be interested in, and I said, you don't have to do much work. I said, I've already written it. I said, I will just give it to you. You can go through and make changes where you want to make changes, and, make it as much your own, or do as little work or as much as you want. So he agreed to do it, because he was very busy at the time too. And we had discussed this ending for the story. It was the ending is physically, it's still the same, but there was a couple of moments of dialogue that really would have brought everything home and really had sort of an impact. And we talked about it. And I said, yeah, that's great. Let's do that. And I don't know if it was my idea or his. I think it was mine, but it doesn't matter. We were talking back and forth and sort of figured it out. And then I didn't write it down. And so we got to the second part of the end of the script, the second issue, and he couldn't work on it anymore. So Wheezy jumped in, Louise Simonson, to finish it off. And I couldn't remember that closing bit of dialogue I had that was so perfect. And I called up Walter and I'm like, do you remember? He's like, are you kidding me? If you don't remember, how would I remember? And so we kind of laughed about it. And the ending is exactly the same, but it didn't have that poignant line of dialogue that I had figured out that would have brought it all, because I could not remember it because I didn't write it down. So that's the story. Always write it down when it comes into your head.
I dreamt the perfect comic book story, and I woke up. I said, that's the best comic book story. And I give myself like 10 minutes to get ready for work in the morning because I want to sleep. I took my shower, got dressed, got in the car. I got the perfect comic book story, got on the train. Somebody bumped into me, and now I'm pissed off. And now I can't remember what that story was. So mad. And it's funny because someday I'll remember it and I'm like, that sucked. But at the time, it was the greatest comic book story ever. when I look at Kit Carter, I get flashbacks to The Lensman. Have you ever read The Lensman? Or
no, I can't say that I have. It doesn't sound familiar. What is that?
The Lensman, E.E. Smith. It was like the first space opera. I think the first book came out in like 1928. But it's a series of novels. And Green Lantern is based on the Lensman. They were these in the future, without getting too complicated, this line of beings guides humanity to produce the perfect beings, and then they give them these lenses that like attach to their body, and they could do Green Lantern stuff. They can fly through space and everything. And I think the last book came out in 1956. But before that, they had the Space Patrol or something like that, and they wore the bubble suits. And there was the gorgeous redhead, and I was like, oh, this is like, it's a hard read, but it's a fun read. But I was like, oh, wow, this is kitschy retro sci-fi. This is right up my alley. I can't wait. So well,
I guarantee you this will not be a hard read. It'll be a fun read. And that's my goal. That's what I'm aiming for. Is my bullseye is just something kind of fun and. It'll be really high concept, big adventure kind of stuff, but it's something that I'm not writing like Wraith of God. I wanted people to read and kind of think about, what's going on here. Cause it was certain layers to the story. This is just going to be sort of fun escapism, and I'm really looking forward to doing something like that. Cause when I write, I tend to get deeper and deeper than I necessarily ever really intended to. And this is going to be one of those things where it's just going to be surface level entertainment with just, fun images and, there'll be stuff at stake and everything, but it's not going to be the deep read that Wraith of God, I think is.
Yeah. Wraith of God. I could tell it's something that you wanted to tell. I thought you did the perfect job of getting me interested with the first book. There was some stakes. There was a little bit of like horror and fear, but I just know the second issue is probably going to bring down some Wrath of God is the only expression I could think of. There's going to be the hammer or something. I think you did a good job. Like, there's darkness coming. And when I saw that Kit Carter image, I'm like, this is I guess how Aaron's going to balance out himself.
Well, I have. That's the thing. I'm not a when it comes to stuff like this, either as a fan, a consumer, or a creator, I'm not a one trick pony. I'm not like, everything horror and nothing else. I mean, I like comedy. I like superheroes. I like pulp adventure. John Carter, Doc Savage. The Shadow. There's so many different things that interest me genre wise that I don't want to just do one type of thing all the time.
Right.
And I've got I got fantasy stories. Like I got a Lord of the Rings type story, not in the sense that it's like Lord of the Rings, but it's that type of material, elves and and really? I want to do it, but I'm trying to figure out, you got all this stuff and it's like, how do I fit it all in? How do I manage my time so I can get all this different stuff, genre material done? And because you don't want to abandon the stuff that's successful, like Wraith of God has been. I just don't want to walk away from that just to do this other story. So you kind of have to try and figure out, how can I space these different projects so that
so many good ideas in so little time.
Yeah, exactly. That's it, right?
Yeah. I gotta acknowledge Alpha Suma. Thank you for the super chat. I think this is like my fourth one ever, so I don't even know how to react. I don't even know what the protocol is. But he's very excited for Kit Carter. Is it going to be a Flash Gordon-esque kind of Barbarella kit? Either way, he can't wait for it.
Yeah, I would say Flash Gordon is a great way, I think, probably to look at it. In fact, there's a backup story in Wraith of God for Kit Carter that's kind of an intro for you guys that leads sort of into the graphic novel, and it's 14 pages. I call it 14 episodes because I was writing it like a newspaper strip originally. And but the villain in it is Zing the Zealous, very similar looking to Ming the Merciless, but it was just, my little nod and a kind of an in joke for those people that pay attention to that stuff. So Kit Carter will have those sort of kind of the basic 50s sci-fi tropes that we're all used to. I mean, that's basically what this is. You've got the monkey in the space suit, and it's just that there's going to be a healthy portion of weird monsters, because that's, I like drawing monsters.
You got to have a good old
space monster. I've got a Thanos-esque type tyrant that she has to battle, and so it's just fun. It's one of those things where you can just think,
fun.
Yeah, you just sit there and go, how crazy can I get with this? What can I throw in here? And which is, a much different approach than Wraith of God, which is very methodical, and you've got to be very structured and get him, why is he going here? What's he doing? What's Esther thinking? How is she going to react to all these different elements?
Well, it's a mystery. Mystery, it's got to make sense. Because comic book fans are pains in the neck. Somebody's going to pick it apart to make sure that the mystery makes sense.
Right. And that was I originally conceptualized Wraith of God back in 1997, and it was a pitch to Marvel to redo their Western Ghost Rider. And they didn't have any interest. But I really liked the story that I'd come up with. So I said, well, I'm going to, I'll make some alterations to it and make it my own character, and maybe someday I'll use it. Yeah. So it's a script that I, have been sitting there for basically 25 years. And I would always noodle on it a little bit here and there, come up with an idea and go, oh, yeah. And I always wanted it to be sort of a kind of a whodunit. I mean, it's not a whodunit, but you don't really know who the werewolves are or is until the end. And that was always sort of part of the format that I thought would be intriguing, that as the Wraith is investigating this, we as the reader are investigating it with him. So we're not ahead of any of the information, that we get it as he gets it, kind of thing. And so it was complex in terms of how I put that together. And I had time to, I spent a lot of time on it. The second issue here, Blood Hunters, which I should get back from the printers in like a week or less.
I can't wait. I'm not joking.
Shipping that up.
My favorite crowdfunded comics. It was so good.
Thank you. But so many people have asked me, said, well, is the next one a mystery too? And I'm like, no, that's not that just happened to be that particular story, because I wanted to kind of play him up like a Batman of the Old West, right? So he's a detective, he's a master of disguise and those type of things. This one was actually a little bit more Hammer film inspired, from the vampire films of the 60s from the Hammer Studios. And so that sort of has that kind of a vibe to it, but it's layered, but it's much more of a straightforward adventure story or horror story, as opposed to a mystery that you kind of read through until you get the ending. But there is some stuff. There's mystery elements because there's stuff set up in Blood Hunters that is going to take place further down the line. So there's elements being entered into it that'll still, I think, be engaging to the readers that it's not exactly like the first book, but it's got enough of intrigue in it that it'll
So
keep
you've
your
built the
interest.
whole world then.
Yeah.
These,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know exactly where I'm going with Wraith of God long term and how it ties into some more of my modern books. I got a trade paperback called Garbage Man, and it was a series I did for DC, and I got the rights back to it.
Oh, you did. I was going to ask you that.
And so I own that now, but I had Dark Horse go ahead and publish the collection, and I introduced the nightclub because I had to take Batman out of it. Batman was a minor appearance in the book, but an important one, but he wasn't in it very much, but he was in it. And so I had to take him out, and I replaced him with my own character as the nightclub. And that epilogue that's at the end of Wraith of God, that gives you a little bit of a flavor. Garbage Man was in there, Mr. Midnight was in there from the nightclub. And so the Garbage Man trade paperback has the first appearance of the nightclub or the introduction to it. And now we have a nightclub backup story that gives us a little bit more information in the Wraith of God Blood Hunters book. So I do have a modern Lopresti verse, if you will, and the Western one, obviously, but they do tie in. And so that there is some goals I'm working towards as we move forward with Wraith of God.
Yeah, I love that. A fully realized world and everything. It just makes it so much fun. And throwing Easter eggs in for long-term fans, that stuff is great. I'm a big fan. F in the chat says, yeah, he's bringing up Hammer Films. Everybody, I see. I'm wearing my Wolf and Batsy shirt. I'm friends with Brian Bow, who does that Wolf and Batsy comic, and he's a Hammer Film fanatic, and he's been giving me lists like homework. Watch this Hammer film. Those are great. I remember watching them as a kid, but they were edited on Channel 11 after church. Now I'm watching them on streaming, and I don't remember all that skin and blood.
Yeah, I know. Well, probably the stuff we saw on TV was edited more than
what they actually were. Was it edited? One of them I remember vaguely. I fondly rather. I was like, well, I don't remember this scene.
Yeah. Well, things like the Vampire Lovers and that type of thing, it gets a little saucy. But one of the ones I remember as a kid and I'm not a big vampire film fan because I like monsters, and I don't find vampires are generally just some suave guy with fangs, right?
Right. They look human.
Yeah. And but at Brides of Dracula, I can't remember the guy who played Dracula, some blonde guy, but it was Peter Cushing was Van Helsing. And all the women, it just cracks me up. If you look at all these vampire films, the women, they're always in these white nightgowns, right. Sheer nightgowns all the time.
Right. What good's being a vampire if you're going to put women in a nun outfit?
Right. Exactly. So I totally took that.
Is your dress, you know what to do.
Yeah. So I totally took that and put it in the Blood Hunters story these Brides of Dracula all, they have their little hammer, right. Sheer white gowns on all the time.
Gowns, you know what I mean? If I'm going to live forever, I want something to look at. Right.
Exactly. And I guess you want to be comfortable, right? So why not run around and, just this.
I'm 200 years old. I can't be restricted. So we got Eric Guapo wants to ask you about Garbage Man. What was your inspiration for that character?
It was more practical than inspiration. When I went over I left Marvel and went to DC. And I was getting ready to take over Wonder Woman, and I was having a conversation with Dan DiDio, and one of the stipulations for me leaving Marvel and going to DC was I wanted to write some of this. I said, I told Dan, I said, I don't want to write a monthly book. I said, I don't want the fatigue, but I said, if I've got a story or a miniseries, I want you to at least be open to listening to my pitch and being okay with me writing it if, you like it. And he said, yeah, I got no problem with that, And so we were talking about, because I was originally, believe it or not, I was originally slated to do Power Girl, the one that Amanda Conner ended up doing, Jimmy Palmiotti. I was supposed to do that. And then Terry Dodson left Wonder Woman, and they were like, we need, somebody to take over Wonder Woman. And then I got all this pressure going, we take over Wonder Woman, Aaron. It's a better book. And of course, Power Girl ended up being way more popular than Wonder Woman. But anyway, So I was having this
Take
conversation
anything
with,
away from anybody, but Amanda Conner, what a talent, huh?
yeah.
Yeah, and Jimmy Palmer, they're like the modern Wheezy and Walt, just the just modern comics power couple. That
Yes.
was difficult to say. I'll let you do the talking. I'm
Well, so I was talking to Dan, about the writing thing, and he was just reinforcing, going, "Hey, if you have, you have something you want to do, just bring it to me, and we'll talk about it. I don't have any trouble with you being a writer too." And I said, "Okay." And so he said, as a matter of fact, he said, "We've got." He goes, "I want to get. We need a monster book for the DCU." He goes, "We don't have a Hulk." And, he said, I'm trying to get Swamp Thing back from Vertigo, but Vertigo wouldn't give Swamp Thing back to DC, which is kind of an odd thing because they're both
right.
DC, but they were separate entities. They had Karen Berger, I guess it was editor-in-chief of Vertigo. They had an editor-in-chief of DCU.
Yeah,
So they basically had right. They had the control of their own characters, right? Even though they were all under the DC banner. And so Dan DiDio wanted Swamp Thing back in DC, the DCU proper, and Vertigo would not give it to him. So he said, "I need a monster character." And I said, "Well," I go, "that's right up my alley, Dan." I said, give me a little time. Let me see what I can come up with. And I wanted to do something that was classic. I wasn't trying to be innovative. I wanted to take something that felt like Swamp Thing, or Sludge, which I worked on at Malibu back in the early 90s. Traditional monster book, right?
Right.
But and so I came up with this concept of, well, okay, what, I can't make him a swamp monster because we've seen that a million times, right? I need to pick up garbage. I only have Aaron's shot glass. I've been drinking the stories every night. That's good. I do have copies of the trade paperback available on the campaign, or you can just contact me directly too. But anyway,
whatever links you want, I'll put them in the description.
Okay, great. Thanks. And so I basically came up with this concept of this, if you were going to use, you always have to have chemicals have to be involved somehow, right, to change the character into a monster. And I thought, well, okay, why don't we get involved with have a pharmaceutical company? And then I just used kind of the cliche thing of they're illegally working on this super soldier serum on a government contract, and they couldn't get it right. And we had this evil scientist that works for the pharmaceutical company that's experimenting on homeless people and things like that, people that wouldn't be missed, if they just turned up missing one day. And so this lawyer who's trying to get ahead, he works for this law firm that represents this pharmaceutical company. And as he gets into their files and he starts to realize there's some incongruities there. And so he goes to talk to him about it. Well, now they're worried. So basically they kidnap him, experiment on him, use him as a guinea pig, or at least this scientist does. And it doesn't go well. And so he ends up just blowing up the whole lab that he was in to cover up any evidence. And the evidence, and so he gets blown up after being injected with these chemicals, and it lingers with the refuse that's behind this plant that's out in the middle of the woods, And so he becomes kind of like this dirt and soil and toxins and tree branches and toilet seats or whatever's out there, I
love that. Yeah.
And so I was trying to figure out a way that I could come up with a new monster without reinventing the wheel, something that already felt familiar so people could jump right into it. Like if you were a Swamp Thing fan, you'd pick up Garbage Man and go, this is close enough to Swamp Thing that I'm comfortable here. Let's go. And so that's what I did. So it wasn't anything that I was sitting around daydreaming about. No, I got to do the Ultimate Monster comic. I was actually commissioned to do it. And so I purposely set out to kind of create a replacement for Swamp Thing. And that's what I came up with. And it was originally going to be its own series. The thing with Dan would always, he'd come out with these bold ideas, but then the practicality of it would get in the way of it. And he'd start thinking, well, this may not sell. So things kept getting altered. It was originally going to be its own series, like an ongoing. We're just going to launch Garbage Man #1 and go. And then he was like, okay, well, let's make it a mini series and see how it goes. I said, that's fine. And so then after it was a mini series, he goes, so I structured it to be a mini series and I was working on the scripts, and he comes back and he goes, let's make it just like a backup feature in the Batman books. And I was like, okay, we're going to have to restructure this. But I said, if it's in the Batman books, at least people will see it,
exposure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, that's okay. I'll just have to break these stories up so, they can be in 10-page increments or whatever. And then he comes back and says, no, we're not going to do that. And so we ended up launching it in the worst possible way possible. He as a mini series, but an anthology mini series. So you've got a mini series, which is hard sell because it's not going to be long-term continuity. And then you've got an anthology, which for some reason always seems to be so deadly in the mainstream comics. And so, it got launched in this anthology book that just got buried immediately. No one ever heard it, and I've still got people coming up to me, here 10, 12 years later going, where was this published? And I go, oh, it was in this miniseries called Weird Worlds. Didn't you read it? And they're like, no. So that's kind of that's the history and origin of my Garbage Man character. But we had signed contracts, and I say Kevin McGuire did, he had an alien chick, space girl, not like I'm doing, but she was actually an alien, had pointed ears, was purple, and
I remember that character, yeah.
Called Tonga. And that was one of the stories that was in this anthology with mine. And he had the same creator contract I did, which was we created this character. We would then license it to DC for a fee, right? So they paid us $2,500 as a license fee, but it was how would you say it? A license agreement in perpetuity. What's the in perpetuity? Is that how it goes? When it just goes on forever, basically, right? So they pay you one time for $2,500. And then as long as they maintain their end of the contract, they never have to pay us again any sort of licensing fee. So all they had to do was use the character once every 3 years, and they had to give us first right of creative refusal. In other words, if they said, we're going to do like a Garbage Man Halloween one shot, Aaron, we need to publish it. Do you want to do it? And then if I said, yes, I want to do it, then they'd have to let me write and draw it. If I said, no, I don't have time, I'm working on this, then they could get someone else to do it. And so Kevin and I both agreed to this contract. And we were sitting there talking because I don't know, it had been a couple of years, and they didn't use, after the miniseries, they didn't show perpetuity. Thank you. Alpha Suma got the right. Perpetuity is what I'm trying to say, in perpetuity. But anyway,
that's why I'm being quiet.
Yeah. So we would sit there and talk at conventions and go, do you think they're going to use these things? And Kevin would always go, we should try and get them back. We should try and get them back. They should give them to us back. They're not going to use them. And I'd say, Kevin, all they have to do once every 3 years is basically make us do a one shot with those characters in it, and they can keep them forever. Why would they give us back an IP? And the reason they never used Garbage Man again is because they got the rights, the Swamp Thing back again. And so they didn't need Garbage Man anymore. And so I kept telling Kevin, I was like, there's no way they're going to give us this back. There's no way. And Dan, when the 3 years was up, I talked to him about it. Kevin talked to him about it. He says, yeah, sure. You can have them back. We don't need them. And they signed the contracts over to us, sent us the paperwork, and they were ours. So it worked out really well. Dan DiDio, although a polarizing figure as editor-in-chief and publisher at DC Comics, I love the guy. He always treated me really well. He was always, very fair with me.
Everybody says
always took care of me while I was there.
He's running a big corporation that you don't even know what things are whispering in his ear. So I understand he's going to make enemies just from the position, but everybody loves the guy. I Jimmy Palmiotti on here a couple weeks ago. He was loving the guy, says he's, Dad, come on my channel. I'd love to talk to you. I was wondering, because there seems to be a lot of DC characters that just came, and then all of a sudden they disappeared. So I wonder if a lot of people were given the same contract that you were given, like some characters, like Jimmy Palmiotti, he had that Monolith character, and then
that's a good point. I don't know. I know Jimmy a little bit, but not like we don't talk or anything like that. But and so I never had occasion to ask him, but I run into him again. I will ask him that because that's a good question. Because when they brought up Garbage Man, or when we brought up the idea of me creating a new monster book, he had brought up Jimmy's Monolith book and said, "Yeah, that was we thought that was going to be our kind of our Hulk monster character, and it didn't sell well enough or whatever." So kind of back to the drawing board. So it was something that Dan really, really wanted, was because Dan DiDio is a big monster guy too. And he wanted a monster book in DC, and we just could never find that sort of monster Hulk character. And ironically enough, I ended up working on a book called Damage for DC. That was another attempt at making that sort of monster Hulk character
I remember
that they wanted to do. And of course, that ended up getting canceled. So
I didn't want to say I forgot about it. I didn't want to hurt your feelings, but I remember that character. Yeah,
a lot of people forgot about it.
You know, it's funny that you said that Vertigo wouldn't let their characters go back and forth. I remember writing fan letters to Karen Berger. I want to see John Constantine dealing with Batman. Wouldn't it just be great to see Constantine pickpocket the utility belt or scam, And then, and I'm like, I can't believe that a publishing company is working on this idea of separation, and like, I called it censorship, but just to be controversial. Of course, my letters weren't published, but then we got the Vertigo and the DC walls breaking down, and I see what they did with Constantine, and I'm like, oh, that's a perfect example of be careful what you wish for.
Right, exactly. You're kind of like, maybe we should have left him over there, but
I should have left well enough alone, you stupid jerk.
Well, but again, it ends up being that, especially in the modern comics, mainstream modern comics, you don't have editors there with a lot of experience or even knowledge or even love for the characters that they're dealing with. So there's no respect for the history of the characters. So you're going to get stuff where they don't deal with the characters the right way, because they don't even know the right way or even care to know the right way. And so
I think, they're not lifelong. They're not lifelong comic book fans. This is a step on their resume. This is a cool job, and I don't blame these people for taking the jobs. Hell, you'd hire me. I'll play whatever you want in a movie, even though I can't act for the paycheck. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's realistic. So I blame the people that hired them. What were you thinking?
Well, it's a different environment, man. When I broke in, and even as late as the 1990s, you still had the old guard there. Guys like Carl Potts was there editing, and it was a great editor. Archie Goodwin was still editing, and everybody, guys, they knew their stuff and they knew what they wanted to do. They had a plan. They knew what parameters their characters needed to operate in, and it was just. There was a lot of knowledge and a lot of love of comics that just isn't there now, or at least the love of what we recognize as comics.
I said this a few times, that I think that the death of Denny O'Neil, or the retirement of Denny O'Neil, was like the bookend of the golden age of comics. We're never going to see comics. Mainstream comics, of course, we're going to see crowdfunded comics. Aaron, Wrath of God is one of those, but I'm talking about the mainstream comics. Something about like Denny O'Neil, I think, was like the end of an era.
Yeah,
I mean, editors who care like that.
There was a time when even when I broke in again, like late '80s, early '90s, where guys like Marv Wolfman and Claremont and Len Wein, and just guys that maybe we even grew up reading, were still in the industry in some capacity, either as editors or writers or whatever. And so that sort of old school feel was still there, even though you had the Image stuff coming in, but the Image stuff was building off the things that were already established. It was just like, it was like classic comics, but on steroids, but they were still classic comic concepts, and it wasn't until, like I said, the last 10 years maybe, or not even that many, where comics is just, when Dan DiDio got outed at DC, he was kind of like, he was an old school comic fan. And, then they started putting people in there that, had no history in comics. no experience in comics, no interest in comics, you know, and it, you know,
Yeah, and it shows. And it
yeah,
shows.
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to be arrogant enough to assume that you've been watching any of my old videos or anything. But I quit Marvel and DC cold turkey in 2015. They made it abundantly clear that they didn't want people like me as their fans. They you know, and for a couple of years, what got me the most was the lack of respect for previous creators, like people that I'd never heard of, or changing the continuities of Jack Kirby creations or Marv Wolfman. I'm like, who are these people that can do this? And then I started thinking, like, what if I got my dream job? I always wanted to write the Fantastic Four, and then next thing you know, some other Aaron Lopresti starts over and then just annihilates my 5 years of. I just found that to be disrespectful. So it left, and then all of a sudden they were just like, we don't want you know, what you guys as our fan base anymore. And I was like, all right, you know, and then what do? I was really depressed. And then I discovered all of these crowdfunded comics, and I'm more excited than ever. You know, I'm not as controversial as JDA. I don't know. I don't know. A couple of people have accused me of being a Pollyanna. Believe me, I'm not. When the camera comes off, I said that a few times, that the New 52 was a good jumping off point, which is me to say because you did some New 52 comics.
You know, I'll tell you, one thing that artists and writers, probably more so artists, and I don't know why that is, but we're always afraid to do store signings because you never know if anybody's going to show up or not, right? And I had done several store signings on other books that I'd been on, and you know, you get 2 or 3 people walk in and you're like, I'm never doing one of these again. Yeah. And then, but when I did Justice League International, which was part of the New 52, the initial launch of the New 52, I agreed to do a store signing, and there was a line out the door. I felt like Frank Miller for the only, because of everybody wanted to get Justice League #1 and, you know, have me sign it. And, so regardless of what do you think of the 52, it worked. The New 52, I thought initially it worked pretty well, but then it sort of fell apart, as a lot of these new concepts do over time.
The art was outstanding. There was a bundle deal on the Discount Comic Books, so I got everything by the New 52 for like 10 issues, and it wasn't bad. It was just different, you know. And I was like, I was like, how long before they change everything again? So I was like, trepidatiously, is that the right word? Like buying, and then what? The sales are going to dip and they're going to reboot again. I just found that to be, I don't know. Now, because Crisis on Infinite Earths came out and I was all aboard. I'm like, yeah, they're making DC Comics good. And the old guys in my comic store were like, what is this? They're destroying my childhood. You know, and now the New 52 came out, and I'm the old guy with the beard going, what is this? They're destroying my child. So I always want to apologize to these old timers. You know, I know exactly how you feel. Sorry, you know, get off my lawn, you kids with your new
That's right. Leave my comics alone.
I just have to address this comment. No one misses a video from John's Well Endowed box. That's my after night video. I don't post those until well after midnight. My Well Endowed box.
The Well Endowed.
John has the same crowdfunding origin as me. Yeah, you know, I might as well ask you this. If you don't want to talk, I understand. But when you started coming into the crowdfunding, the mainstream had some nasty reactions to you, right?
Yeah, I couldn't quite figure it out. I think I pieced together the mystery. I probably represented more so than a lot of people what you would consider the establishment of mainstream comics. I'd been in it for so long. I wasn't a superstar, but I was respected. And then, you know, and there was people that knew that I was, you know, conservative. I didn't hide it. But I wasn't a political advocate, because I just, you know, I was just there to draw comics.
Right.
And, but, you know, as soon as I threw my hat in the ring with Ethan Van Sciver, then, you know, you become public enemy #1.
Right.
And
you're not human anymore, and they could insult you and insult your wife.
Right. And what they don't understand, what these people did not understand, and maybe they're starting to understand it now because they're all looking at the unemployment line in a lot of instances, was that I didn't make the decision to go, this independent route uh, until after AT&T, who was owned DC at the time. Now they're Discovery, of course, owns Warner Brothers, but they went in there and they fired everybody in that September of, it was 2019, 2020, whenever it was.
Remember that, the bloodbath. Yeah.
Yeah, they let Dan DiDio go in January, which really got me nervous because Dan was the guy who had my back and always made sure I had jobs. And but then an editor gave me some Justice League stuff, and I thought, okay, well, I'm okay then, And so when I got done with the Justice League stuff, we got into September, and I was kind of trying to figure out what my next move was going to be. And then they came in and just fired everybody I knew, everybody that I had relationships with, that that I could just go in there and call them up and go, hey, I need a series, what have you got, kind of thing. All gone. And so I was kind of left with the harsh realization that hearing a guy in my mid 50s would have to go and start groveling to a bunch of barely out of teenager, editors that had no concept of who I was and didn't give a rip. And I said, you know what? I had to grovel the first time I broke into comics, as I'm not doing it again.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any relations at Marvel because I just didn't keep up any sort of communications with Marvel editorial, because when I went to DC, I just kind of focused on that. And so I was just in a position where felt like I'd be starting over, and none of this woke crap had worked its way through comics yet. It was just, it was getting to that. It was starting to get to that point, but it was just the cleaning house and everything. I was just like, I am not going to do this anymore. And I saw that Ethan and some other people were having great success crowdfunding. And I thought, if I can get one of my projects just to make enough money that I can, that I can live off of it while I'm making the book, that would be a success. And I can do my own projects, which I've always wanted to do, but was always too scared to. And now I kind of felt like I had no choice. Right. So then I get all these midnight emails from people and, oh, you'll never work in this industry again and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm not working in this industry now.
Are you offering me a job?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're threatening me with nothing, because if I don't do this, I've got nothing.
Right.
And at least if I do it, there's a chance.
How about you publish my project then, if you're so concerned about me?
Right. And then, of course, like what often happens, whenever someone tries to cancel you, that ends up fueling the attention on your project, and then helps it get the eyes on it needs, and then makes it, or gives it a better chance to be successful. And then, I was fortunate enough that the book, when it came out, it was well received. And so then that puts you in a position where people now expect or think that your next project's going to be good. So they trust you a little bit more, and you just slowly build on that.
Was Wraith of God your first project?
Yeah, I tried to crowdfund Garbage Man, but I was still working at DC, and I didn't really understand how to do it correctly. And so it failed, and I didn't raise the money that I needed to raise to do it. So I just ended up taking it to Dark Horse and let them publish it. And so all the copies of Garbage Man trade paperback I have are all ones I keep buying from Dark Horse at wholesale to resell. I've sold more copies. They've sold more copies to me to resell than they've sold themselves. So it's kind of funny, but
there you go, everybody. Pick up some Garbage Man.
That's right.
Yeah.
Pick it up from me.
Yeah, pick it up directly from the garbage truck right over here.
That's right, exactly.
We're very fortunate. I'm not going to mention names, but I remember right before you came over to the independent side, the Comics Gate side, whatever you want to call it, the conservative. I got into a Twitter exchange with some, and again, I'm not going to reveal names, so don't ask. But he was flirting with the idea of doing a crowdfund, and I said, "Oh, that would be really great." And then in the comments, you don't want certain people to buy. And what do you mean certain people? So I just said, I voted for Trump. Am I welcome to buy your comic? I got maybe a little too political than I should have.
Right.
He blocked me, and I got a nasty email from his wife. Not nasty, I take it back. An upsetting email from his wife, like I know what you're doing, and please don't repeat this, but we can't mention that. We can't respond to that question because they'll destroy us. And it was just pleading with me to leave them alone. And I felt this big. I felt so bad that I did it, and I haven't done it since. You know, I'm stupid. I admit it. And I felt so bad for this couple and their wife, basically begging me to stop saying this, or their friends will destroy them. And this this was a top guy who was in the 90s selling hundreds of thousand copies a month. So I'm like, man, I told myself I was going to be less political. So there you go. I'm less controversial than JD8 because I felt really bad. I felt like I really hurt somebody's career or life, you know, because some of these people are swatting people and stuff, you know. So I was like,
yeah, it's nasty, and it's but what I found was that, well, first of all, I have no energy or desire to argue with people.
Yeah,
on
I'm getting that way.
Twitter and Facebook, because it's a dead end street. It's ridiculous, and you know, people are just there to troll. And
I've done it. I'm guilty as charged. I'm trying to stop.
Well, my wife does it too, and I keep saying, Shelly, why?
I love your wife, by the way. I've been talking with her, and my wife has been praying for your wife. You know,
thank you very much. I appreciate that. But yeah, she likes to mix it up, and she's got more.
She's feisty.
Yeah, I tend to like, let's go down the path that is of least resistance. And my feeling is that I have my personal feelings, and if you come up to me at a convention or whatever and ask me about stuff, I'll tell you what I think. But putting that stuff online and just encouraging trolls and all these people to call you a Nazi is not.
Yeah,
it doesn't worth it to me, because as a producer of product, I want people that think the same way I do to buy my book, but I also want people that maybe don't think the same way I do to buy my book.
Right.
So if you make it, you can make it all about politics, and then you're sort of putting yourself in a really, really small niche, right? Or you can make it just about the product, in this case, comics, and saying, this is the comic. And I've always been someone who dealt more with moral issues than I have dealt with political issues. And so those are the things that I tend to filter my stories with, are moral dilemmas or moral choices that characters have to make. And politics are, that's secondary to morality in my mind. And so that's something that everybody can sort of relate to. They may not agree with your morals, but everybody has morals, or at least what they think are morals, right there.
Right.
And we're all dealing with the human side of things. How do we deal with problems? If you're spiritual, if you're a Christian like I am or something like that, then you look for spiritual answers. If you're a secularist, you're still asking yourself the same question, which is basically, why am I here? What's my purpose, right? And so those are kind of the things that I like to deal with in my stories. And the political stuff is a landscape that's always shifting and changes. And so it doesn't, it's not something that's as interesting to me or as intriguing. Although I do have my political opinions, obviously we all do, but they don't really filter into my story. I'm more concerned about issues of virtue and morality. And I
like how Alpha Suma says, moral makes for a classic, enduring story. Politics falls.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's a good quote. I'm going to steal that and put that in the comic there, Alpha. So,
there you go. Exactly.
Exactly. That's a really succinct way of putting it. Thank you for putting that in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just feel something. It's not just comic books. Like Friends got super political. I don't know. Something maybe there was something in that COVID that just made everybody crazy. Or
well, it was it's Trump, right? Because Trump exposed. We'd always joke for decades about how corrupt politicians were, but we had no idea how corrupt they were until Trump got into office.
Now,
right?
Trump knew how corrupt they were. He just didn't realize how deep the swamp
right
went.
But it all came to the surface, right? And so then the people that are part of the political machine, and even voters that are part of the political machine and don't want to see it disrupted, why anyone would ever trust the government on anything is beyond me. But there are people that do, and they don't want that disrupted, right? And then there's the people that are the disruptors that want it tore down and fixed. And so then it became this huge polarizing thing. And so then everybody in comics and in movies, and they've all been 98% liberal throughout history. But it's for some reason, when Trump got to be president,
people went
It became this line in the sand that really, became like civil war.
right.
And you're right. It filters through absolutely everything.
Right.
It's not comics, movies. It's everything. So
I got friends that won't talk to me anymore. I'm like, dude, you used to come to my house every week. We used to play Dungeons and Dragons, and now you found out that I voted for somebody you didn't like. How many elections did we not vote for the same people, and it didn't matter until 2016?
Right. Well, see, I've done the smart thing. I don't have any friends, and so therefore I didn't have to worry about it.
There you go. So I'll play Dungeons and Dragons by myself. I'll roll the dice, and then I'll get up and I'll sit in the other chair, and then roll the dice again, get up, sit in the other chair. Oh, it's a party of 6, and I'm exhausted.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's, and it was really hard when all that stuff happened because I thought a lot of people were friends of mine. And then I had people at, the big, 2 of the 3 big, meaning Marvel, DC, and Image. I know 2 for sure, maybe all 3, but 2 of them were telling people don't even associate with me if they want to keep working for them, and how, and they're calling me a Nazi and a fascist. It's like you guys are the ones who are behaving like fascists. But anyway,
for them and put like a yellow Star of David on yourself to make it
easy. Exactly. It was just the whole thing was like, we're talking about comic books here, right? I mean, how absurd is this?
What would Spider-Man do?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it hurt me at first and it really bothered me. I was like, oh my gosh, my life is ruined. But then after you kind of get used to it and you understand that, I went to a show, the first show I went to after all this stuff went down, and I still had in Portland, Oregon, which may be one of the most liberal cities in the world. I was
going to ask you, how do you survive out there?
Well, I don't live in Portland, but I'm in that area. And I went to the show and all the professionals were like avoiding me like the plague, but none of the fans were. Like they didn't even know.
Yeah, they don't care.
They just say, "You saw my Wonder Woman?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And so I realized that the noise you're hearing on Twitter or Facebook represents like 0.00 something of the actual population. So I was like, I quit worrying about it. If the pros don't want to talk to me, I don't give a rip. And so, and it's really softened over the last couple of years. People are, because I don't post anything inflammatory.
No, you don't.
No one has any reason to be pissed off at me. So after a while, this stuff starts to subside a little bit. And the guys that wouldn't talk to you, they start talking to you again. And,
I'm not bitter. I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't talk back. I don't know. I'm like my mom. I'm going to hold a grudge until the afterlife.
Well, there's only one person.
On a cloud and turn my back at the other guys on the cloud.
There's only one person that in the professional industry, I won't name names. You guys probably can figure out who it is, but that I just don't. I never really had much to do with him anyway. But he's gone too far that I can't. I don't lose sleep over. I don't hold grudges, but I don't want anything to do with the guy going forward ever again. And but for the most part, I just kind of live and let live. And I figure,
I have a theory that because a lot of the mainstream guys have dipped into crowdfunding and Kickstarter, Indiegogo, whatever you want to call it, Fund My Comic, and they failed. And I started thinking. I think what it is the people who stayed with Marvel and DC, liberal, for whatever you want to say, it's a group mentality, it's a collective mentality, and then the conservatives, again, this is a stereotype. We're more individuals, like individual rights, individual.
Yeah, you can't find 2 conservatives to agree on anything.
Right, yeah, and I think the crowdfunding scene is. Aaron Lopresti's putting up Rate the Gut, and it's all on you. You can't blame your editor. You can't blame Denny O'Neil. You can't blame Walt Simonson. It's you, and it's you alone. And I don't think a lot of the other side guys they're too group minded to be an individual and make a comic just by themselves. So I think that's why you don't really see a lot of them. I don't know. Am I crazy or
no? There's also I don't think anybody understands how much work it is, right? And you get used to drawing pages, get a script, draw pages, turn them in, get a paycheck.
Let somebody else do all day.
And you don't put any of the stuff together. And then it shows up. You get like your comps 3 months later, and now suddenly you're completely in charge of all the PR. You're completely in charge of all the editorial, all the post production, and then shipping, right? All this stuff is under your purview. You're in charge of all of this and you're responsible for all of it. That's why you see a lot of guys have done campaigns and just flaked out. they took the money and didn't produce because the colossal amount of work involved in putting together a book, you have to have the right mentality. You have to have the right personality for that. I've always been interested in self-publishing. I'm a very type A personality. I would do everything myself if I could, just because then I know it's going to be what I want. But I only work with people. When I do work with other people, it's people that I trust implicitly, right? And there's not a ton of people that any of us can say that they,
that's
trust with your life, right?
Healthy way to live, I think.
Right. And but that it's just people don't understand the work. And most people in this industry, most artists or writers, they want to do the creative stuff.
They want to do the glory work.
Yeah, they don't want to do all the other stuff.
They don't want to have your 90-year-old mom stuffing envelopes.
That's right, exactly. But I will exploit the elderly to get the job done.
Right. So, Aaron was telling me before we went live that he's got his mom. She's going to the post office, guys. So when you get Wraith of God, you say thank you, because 90-year-old grandma put that in the mailbox.
That's right. So and I think that's the biggest problem. I mean, everybody they see a successful campaign and they're like, well, why can't I? I'll do that. I'm more popular than Aaron. Why can't I make that kind of money? But they don't want to do all the other stuff that goes with it.
You got to wake up in the morning. You got to call the printers. You got to do these files. You got to, make the email list. That's not fun.
No.
I'm learning how not fun it is.
No, and it's also this, the YouTubing, right?
Yeah.
You've got to do, now you're a program director as well, right? And a creator of content online, because this is how you get your message out. And
I don't want to mention names, but I've seen a couple of mainstream people crash and burn on YouTube because they got a nasty personality. On Twitter, it's fine to say like, "Oh, I like wine and cheese," and then get a million likes. But when you got to sit there and, I'm amazed that I lasted as long as I did. Look at me. I look like the guy you wouldn't sit next to on the subway.
Yeah, you got to figure out a way to reach people, and you got to be comfortable in front of a camera. And a lot of people aren't that either, So it's
you can act for that long,
Yeah.
Some people that their true colors shine through when you watch them in a 10-minute video.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And so there's a lot involved in it that I think most guys in the mainstream just don't want to get involved with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame it. I think a lot of people like what's the word? The word is escaping. But a lot of comic book people, and I'm speaking generally, they want to sit in their basement and tell stories. If they wanted to go out and get in front of a camera, they would have taken up acting or something. You know what I mean? Like, really, comic books is a solitary habit. Me sitting down here reading this I don't need a group of friends to enjoy this. But for me, I wanted a group of friends to talk about it when I'm done reading it. And I imagine making a comic book. I could picture you with your headphones on, with your head down, drawing. You know what I mean? And then you got to get online and talk to strangers. And then you got weirdos like me going, "Hey, come on, let's talk on the internet."
Right, it is. And I've had people contact me and go, "What does it take to do this?" And other pros, and I explain it to them. It's like, I was YouTubing a year before I launched Wraith of God, and I was teasing it for a year before I launched it. And it's just like, and that's because guys like Ethan and other people was like, "Dude, if you want to be successful at this is what you got to do." And what's that? Ethan told his story. How did you need to leave, Aaron? Didn't we just cover that?
Yeah, you just told us.
F in the chat. Did you just fall asleep?
Yeah. You can watch the replay. He told the story, and what you said, it made perfect sense.
I did it, like I said, in short, the Reader's Digest version. I did it because I had to, because everybody I knew at DC got fired. So it was like, what was I left with? So
you need to buy breakfast. You need to buy lunch and dinner.
Right. And I've got projects that I've wanted to do for years and never had time, because you could either never convince Marvel or DC to do it, or you didn't have time because you were working on something else that, paid the bills.
I'm working on a theory. Can I ask you, do you have children?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. your boy Zach said it. He goes, childless weirdos, and he stopped saying it, but he's
it puts a whole
absolutely
new
right. Look at all
perspective.
the people that are destroying comics. They have no investment in the future.
Well, they're
Oh, you blanked out. I didn't hear what you said.
I was going to say that when you're single, especially if you're involved in something that requires your all your time to be good at, right, and all your effort to be good at, like art or film or music or whatever, you become out of necessity a very selfish person, right? You're very driven by what motivates you to achieve your goal. Okay, you get married, you have kids. You can't be selfish anymore. Those people become your number one priority if your head's screwed on straight. They do.
Right.
And it teaches you humility, and it teaches you how to you have a greater understanding of different personalities, because now you're dealing with your wife. It's not just you. Now it's her. Now you've got a kid. Now I have 2 kids, and it's like they have different personalities and they have different likes and they have different things that, and you're trying to shape their future for them, but at the same time understand who they are and what their needs are.
Right.
And you start by just necessity having to put their needs in front of your own. And once you start to do that, then you get a bigger picture and a better understanding of other people and other people's struggles and, what other people may be thinking.
Sacrifice.
Right. And a lot of people in the arts don't have that perspective because they stay single, because they're driven to achieve their goals. And that's their whole focus is them and their goals. And so therefore they start writing stories about themselves.
Right.
They start writing, making films about themselves,
right.
Because they're the most important thing in their life. And it's a terrible way to go through life.
Yeah, I'm writing a comic book about this fat blob who sits around and reads comic books all day and eats Taco Bell.
Well, that's about many of us then.
And somebody in the chat, he just said, and got to keep earning. Like Jack Kirby, I don't know how many kids he had, but he couldn't stop. He had bills to pay. He had kids to put through college. And that, when you live by yourself and you got 19 roommates, what do you got to make $170 a week? That's it. You know what I mean?
Right. Or some of these guys in this generation, they still live at home. They're 30 something, living with their parents, and they don't have the responsibility of, paying those bills, the mortgage, the electric bill, the water bill, paying for the dog food, and you're sending your kid through college and all these things. Those are great motivating factors to do work.
Right.
You take all that stuff away, and you can just kind of be self-indulgent and draw when you want to draw, and you can spend 3 weeks on a page till it's absolutely perfect. And
and also these guys, they fought in wars. They went overseas. Stan Lee just walked up to some woman and said, "I'm going to marry you." Leave your fiance. These were people with stories to tell, even if they never made a comic book. I look back at these newcomers. I'm like, what story do you got to tell me?
Exactly.
So, anything you want to say? I normally keep these to an hour because I find that a week from now, nobody clicks on a 3-hour video. So, we'll close it down. Anything you want to say?
Just, I appreciate, guys. I know a lot of people in the chat have backed the campaigns or are in the process of it, or will eventually back the campaigns. And I just, I appreciate the support from you guys out there, because we couldn't do any of this if it wasn't for you guys. And, I do, appreciate the consideration. If you haven't backed Kit Carter, Planet Doom, please, at least take a look at the campaign. I just bought the domain Kit Carter Planet Doom. And so I'm getting that up. Hopefully tonight, that website will actually be up. It'll have a link that'll take you right to the campaign. And you can get the links, on any of my social medias.
The links in the description also. I backed day one. I was like, I saw that image and I trusted you, and I know Wraith of God. So I'm like, this is a no-brainer. This is what comic books are. This is what comic books are all about.
That's what they should be all about. We're going to bring it back, baby. So
yeah. I can't wait. I'm thank you for coming. I'm excited. like I said, I got really depressed about 5-6 years ago about comics, and now I'm more excited than I've ever been. Look at this. I'm surrounded by comic books everywhere you look at this silly apartment. I'm surrounded by comic books, and I love it. And thank you for it. I feel like
My pleasure.
giving back to people. I've been reading these comics for 30-40 years, and if I could help you guys in your campaign in any possible way, I'm glad to do it.
I appreciate it very much, John. I really do.
All right, so we're gonna close down now. I promised my wife I'd take her to dinner, and you don't back down on a deal like that.
No, you don't. You get yourself in trouble.
But thank you guys. Thank you, Aaron, for coming.
My pleasure.
Say hello to Shelly. I love
Will do.
Shelly. I love talking to her on Twitter. She's and like I said, my wife is praying. I know she's having a rough time. So thanks a lot, everybody, and thanks everybody in the chat, and thanks. I forget who it was that did a super chat. That's like my 4th one in 3 years. Thank you so much. I don't know what to do. I feel like a cam girl. Should I take my shirt off? You know what? If somebody can match him or double it, I'll keep my shirt on. How's that?
That's right. Pay him to keep his shirt on. It's coming off. Like
Well, thanks a lot, everybody. I'm going to get going. Bye-bye.
All right. Good night.